see. Can you hear me? Can you all hear me? Is it working? I don't really need it, but we'll just see what happens. So how's everyone doing this morning? It's early, it's wet, it's a little cold outside. Thank you. It's early, it's wet, it's a little cold outside. Many of you, I have had the opportunity to either work with, do a training for, visit your school. And some of you are probably wondering, is she actually a real person? Because I see her name, but I don't actually see her. So I am the coordinator of equity and diversity here in Washoe County School District. We are responsible for all equity and cultural competency work across this district. I have a department of about 12, but these are my full-time staff. So there's Tony Montgomery, who is an equity and diversity specialist. Siobhan Mulraney, she's another one of our equity and diversity specialists. Fawn Hunter is our Indian education specialist, so I also have Indian education under our department. And then Jeff Asimata is our other equity and diversity specialist. He's back there in the back. So we thank you all for being here. As many of you know, this work of equity has been the focus for the district this school year. So our superintendent has said that equity and diversity will be the focus that we work across the entire district. And what you need to know is equity and diversity is not just about a school building, but this equity framework works across the entire district. It is a system-wide approach. So our goal today really is to facilitate a discussion that will allow you to gain some foundational knowledge of the equity framework as it pertains to culturally responsive practices. So oftentimes when we hear words like equity and cultural competency, if we're not in a school building, we think that it's separate from us or the work that we do. So it's important for you to understand that when we talk about equity, we're talking about a system-wide approach. So my hope is that you all have 2 handouts. You should have a spiral, small little journal, and then you should have this blue paper, which is front and back. If you do not have those, please try and grab one really quick and then come back so that we don't miss your engagement in this time. So when you say equity and we think about what is the conversation that needs to happen, we use this quote all the time in our departments, and we talk about that we don't see things as they are, we see things as we are. So for many of us, we foundationally come from something. We are grounded and rooted in some core values, some core belief, some core tradition. And then when you get older, you either run as far away from that as you possibly can, or you take a couple of sprinkles in between. But the key is to find out is that core belief that we have landing in our everyday practice? So is what you believe about people or about education, about particular groups, about the definition of success, about good and bad and right and wrong, where does that come from? And how does that land in your everyday practice? If we're looking at this conversation of equity and this work around cultural competency, we have to understand that we show up some way every day. And how we show up informs our daily practice. And if you're not in a space to have the opportunity to reflect on who you are in that day, we may be doing things, have practices, we may be leading and having damaging things happening to students, families, and staff that we engage in on a regular basis. So when we hear this quote that says we don't see things as they are, we see things as we don't see things as they are, we see things as we are, we have this lens, right? We come into a space with this lens, and we have to know that. So many of you have seen this framework. It is in your spiral books. This framework was created by Curtis Linton. It is not created by us here in Washoe County School District, but we have taken this framework and we've layered it across many aspects of our work. So when you look at this framework, it does not just lie across a building. It is the equity work of the entire system. Human resources has to do the equity work. Central office has to do the equity work. Legal has to do the equity work, right? Buildings and grounds has to do the equity work. Principals, you have to do the equity work. Teachers, you have to do the equity work. Counselors, you have to do the equity work. Assistants, secretaries, administrators, we all have to do this equity work. So it is not about a particular person, and not is it the sole responsibility of a department. So when we talk about equity as a district, we are working across equitable outcomes for everyone. So today we're going to get some foundational understanding so that as you move through the rest of your sessions, as you listen to your second keynote, you have some pieces of connection to understand how this framework pertains to you in your practice. Okay? So on your green, your blue, I'm a little colorblind sometimes, but not in the sense of I don't see color in people, just in paper, because that's not real. All right. So equity framework. What are the words or phrases that describe, define what culture, practice, leadership look like in your classroom and environment? This is the prompt that some of you are going to hear from Jeff, but that's not what we're going to talk about today. Today we're going to talk about how we dig deeper into what this looks like. So on the back of your bluish green paper, you have the definitions of the 3 anchors of the equity framework. So in those 3 anchors are culture, practice, and leadership. Within those 3 anchors are 4 characteristics, and those are rigor, relevancy, expectations, and relationships. So what I want you to do is just take a few minutes and skim through the definitions, because we're going to talk about what do you see showing up in the spaces that you operate. So take a couple of minutes, skim through the definitions. You've got a couple of lines there for some note takers, and then we're going to jump deep into how this framework pertains to you and your individual lives and practices. So let's start with this anchor of culture, right? So for many of us, when you hear words like equity, diversity, and you hear culture, some of us are like, yeah, we're getting ready to have that conversation. Some of us are like, oh my goodness, we're getting ready to have that conversation. And others of us are like, oh, I don't even know if I want to be in that conversation, right? Those are some real things that happen. But when we talk about culture, let's talk about what is the culture of the environment that you work in, okay? So when we think about the culture of our environment, we show up some way. You show up some way in that environment. And there is some message or some tone about the department, the school, the office that you work in. There is some culture of that environment. There may be a culture of we love all families, we love all kids, or we just come here to get a paycheck and we're going to get it over with. Or if you're new here, you better figure it out because you're just going to have to survive. We may have some culture that's set in that space. And so oftentimes if we don't understand how we show up in that space, and how the culture of that space operates, we end up with some cross-cultural conflict, right? So what I want you to do is take a couple of minutes and think about the culture that you're in. And I want you to describe it. So on your front page of your paper where the framework is, you've got 3 boxes. You're going to describe your culture. Not what you think it is, meaning what do you feel? What do you experience? What do you know? Is it a culture of building capacity for people? Is it a culture that's toxic? Is it a culture that there's norming negative thinking, which is one of our equity traps that we fall in? Is it a culture that says the reason why we are working here is because we're about kids, because it's an educational institution? Is it a culture that says when people are new, we bring them in, we grow them, we build them? What is the culture? Is it friendly? Is it welcoming? What is the culture that you currently are working in? Take a few minutes in your culture box and just describe what that culture looks like, feels like, sounds like. Think about when you first started. Think about where you are now. Think about, I mean, this is a great culture. I love it. I want more people to come in. Or are you like, don't come work here. This is not good. We're not going to share it with anybody and don't write anybody's names down. So we're just going to talk about it. Gives you an opportunity to think. So thinking about what you wrote down for the culture you're in as you describe that culture, we have to be mindful about when you prepare your day, when you get up, who you have to be to survive in that culture. So in your spiral, there's a couple of tools, and we're not going to go through the entire book, but there's this concept of fish out of water. Who's ever heard of that? Right? So everybody in their life at some point will be, are, or were a fish out of water. So you came into this space, and we want to know, how did you find out how to survive? How did you know how to do your job? How did you know what was supposed to happen? Who did you know was the safe person, and who did you know to avoid? Right? Who were the betas in that water? Who's the alpha in charge? What were the tactics? How did you know to be successful? How many of you knew what your job was when you got hired? Other than the job description, but your actual job, right? So when we think about this culture, we have to understand, yes, there's the deep-rooted conversation about race and ethnicity and how we show up within our racial and cultural identity in that space, but we also have the culture and climate of our environment. So when we look at our students across this district, we are 57% students of color, what we statistically call a majority minority, right? Oxymoron when you think about it. But when we look at our staff, oftentimes our staff does not represent our student body and our family. But that does not mean that you can't meet the needs and build the capacity for our student body or in our family. But if you're showing up constantly, not evaluating how you land in that space, you could potentially be doing some harm to our students and our family. So when we're in this space of this work and we say things like, well, some of those things don't matter, well, then that's probably the perspective in your cultural worldview, but it may not be the people that it's landing on. So the message we always tell you in equity and diversity is that our intentions may be well placed, but the impact is not always the same. It may have felt good when it came out of your gut, but it came out like hot lava and landed and burned someone. So our intentions do not always equal our impact. It is very important for us to understand just because it came from a good place doesn't mean that it landed that way. So when we think about the evaluation, how we assess the culture, who is there? Who teaches the codes? Who's sharing the codes? How did you learn? Some of you and some of us are still in spaces and we still don't know how to unlock all the doors and crack all the codes. And what does that say about the culture? If you're experiencing that as an employee, imagine what our students and our families are feeling like in those spaces. So as we talk about this work of equity, it's really about what do you individually need in your professional spaces to be successful. So if you and I start our job on the same day, it doesn't mean that we're going to have the same skill sets. We may even have the same job title. But as the supervisor in that space, you need to know who I am and what I need to be successful, and you need to build my capacity. And I need to figure out who I am coming into that space as well. So when we talk about this work of equity, it's not just about a classroom and a book and a building. It's about an entire system and the structure. So those are the things you need to think about as you start to break down this conversation around culture and the professional capacity. Describe it. What does it feel like? Right? So my daughter, I don't know, some of you I saw yesterday, I had this beautiful purple sweater on, and my daughter crocheted it for me. She's an amazing kid. She's really amazing. But she sent me a text yesterday, which was funny because at the same time I was getting all these compliments, and she said, I don't want to make these sweaters anymore because it's not fun. And I said, don't do it. Like, she's got the skill, she's got the talent, she's got the patience, but it's not fun. So don't do it, right? So don't squeeze yourself into something that is causing you discomfort, right? And granted, some of us have no choice because we have some professional family obligation that we have to be at, but at least we need to know the spaces that we're walking in and operating, okay? So as we think about all these things about culture and how we show up, then that shifts us into this conversation about practice, right? So for many of us in our jobs, we've been doing them every day. Who's on autopilot? How many people get up and go to work and don't realize how you actually got there? Anybody? Right? How many of you leave work and get home and don't realize how you actually got home, right? Have you ever had that experience? Like, you get home and you think, oh, I don't even remember the drive. I remember walking out of the building and then I just walked into the house. Because we get on this autopilot and we've got this practice down pat. We know how to get to work. We know how to get home, right? And so many of us in our jobs, we've been doing the same thing over and over again. And we have not stopped to evaluate our practice. Do we know if it's successful? Are we doing what we're supposed to be doing? Do we understand what the practice should be? So when we talk about this piece of culture, we understand the environment that we're in. But what is our actual practice? So do you take a few minutes and I want you to think about, like, so what is the practice? What do I do? What is it that I actually do? What is my job? What is my responsibility? Take a few minutes, jot down some things. What is it? Describe it. How do you describe your practice? Job interview day 2. What is your actual job? What do you do? What's your practice? And as you think about your practice, what's the impact of your job on the district? Your daily job, what is the end result? So I'm going to bring you all into the equity and diversity department. Today you all get to be like 5-minute equity and diversity specialists. Yeah, the excitement, right? So I'll be honest with you. If you think about the work of our department, we are not a punitive department. Our job is to build capacity. But we are a department that has difficult conversations, and we're usually 90% of the time the ones in the room going, excuse me, I'm sorry, what did you say? What did that mean? How did that land? What do you think? We're the department that's usually doing that. So we're often getting the question, why are you always so, you all fill in the blank, right? Why are you always so negative, mean, argumentative, disagree? We have all these things, right? Very rarely do we get, we're so glad that you do this. And we understand that. We know that as a department. So I, as a supervisor, would be remiss if I did not sit down and have these conversations with my staff. Hi, you're hired in the equity and diversity department. I'm going to have some honest conversations with you about the demographics of this district. You as a black man or as a white woman, as a Native woman in this space, here are some things you're going to experience. This is what's going to be very important about how your voice operates in this space. This is what you need to know as you read and build your capacity and have some understanding. These are some things you need to acknowledge as we walk into a room and do this work. Because in order for you to be successful, your practice needs to look like this. And the reason why we are here is because of this, this, and this. So when I talk about equity, just from a department standpoint, this is the work that I have to do in order to build the practice in our district. It's important that we understand what's going to land on us. We don't walk into a room and go, what just happened? Like we didn't know it was going to happen. It's usually like, that just happened. Let's figure out how we process it. Because we have to have difficult conversations. We have to get to the core of people's values and traditions and beliefs. We have to unpack some things sometimes. We have to say out loud the things that you said like way, 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 way down in your gut, and you hope that anybody never would have said out loud. And that's okay. But we have to read constantly. Right? Jeff's probably like going, I didn't realize there's going to be so many books we were going to have to read. But we read and we read and we reevaluate tools and we tweak and we build resources because it's important that as the equity and diversity department, our practice is happening. So now you all have been equity and diversity specialists for about 2 minutes, right? So your practice now is to walk into these spaces. And so do you know, just by what I just told you, that when you walk into a room that is going to be a little challenging? Everybody? Yeah? Do you know that you're going to have some content knowledge based on what I said in that short period of time? Yeah? Do you know that we're going to reevaluate and tweak materials and resources just in that short period of time? Right? And do you know that our end result is to make sure that we have great outcomes for all of our students based on those just 2.5 minutes that we just talked? So in that short period of time, just understanding that I also am considering, do you know that I'm considering how you show up in that space to do this job in that short period of time? Do you know that as a boss, I'm thinking about you and how you show up in that space? Just because I said, as a black man, as a white woman, as a Native woman, this is what's going to happen in that space. Do you know that I'm thinking about you? So this work of equity, again, is not just about a school building. It's about how we work across all systems. And our practice is key. How it lands, what is the outcome, what are those results? And we have to know that, right? Because we get on autopilot, right? You all are going to go home today, and you're going to get home, and you're going to go, that darn Tiffany, I can't remember how I got home, right? Because you just don't. It just happens. We wake up, we get up, we go. This morning, autopilot, right? Straight to the kitchen. I was in the dark. I reached out because I didn't see the light on the coffee pot. I had a little bitty panic attack, touched it. It was hot because it did go off, and the timer, right? Just autopilot. It's like, gotta go in, it's dark, can't find anything, but I know where the coffee pot is. So we do these things automatically. It's important that you understand what your practice looks like. So now let's talk about this last anchor of leadership. Okay? We're in this system of hierarchy. And when we say leadership, some of us, our minds automatically go to our boss. Okay, leadership, now she's going to be talking about my boss. All right? So when we talk about leadership, we have a board of trustees, we have a superintendent, we have chiefs, we have area superintendents, we have departments, we have department heads, we have managers, it just goes on and on and on. But leaders are layered approach. We have the leaders of our school buildings and our departments. We have the leaders in our classrooms, our teachers. We have our students who are leaders of their own learning. We have you all who are leaders in your work. You have the capacity, you have the ability, and you are leaders in your roles. Because we take leadership and we equate it to a title, and we forget that within each and every one of us, we are leaders in the capacity that we operate. Right? So we all hold some knowledge. We all hold some skill. We all hold the will and ability to get our jobs done. And in that right, that makes you a leader. That means you have something that you can share with someone. You can teach someone. You can tell someone. You can build capacity for someone. You don't have to be their boss to be a leader in the space that you operate. So I want you to take a couple of minutes and think about the leadership skills that you hold and describe that. Describe those leadership skills that are operating in the spaces that you work in. Take a few minutes. What does your leadership role look like? Are you a guider? Are you a listener? Are you a come-along-sider? Are you someone who knows all the codes and like, I'm going to make sure I share these with someone? Hopefully you're not a keeper of the codes and keeping them all to yourself. But what kind of leadership do you see in yourself? What does your leadership look like, sound like, feel like? So I'm going to take you back to that framework. And I wanted you to just think about those three anchors: culture, practice, and leadership. As a framework of the work, imagine if we decide that we're going to show up on Monday and we're just going to pull culture completely out of this framework. Right? We're just going to erase culture. Because we typically tend to do that. Right? So what we're going to say is, how you typically show up, you cannot show up that way on Monday. How does that feel? Right? Does that feel like equity? I need you to show up like me on Monday. Don't show up like you. Show up like me on Monday. Doesn't feel too good, does it? Right? What if we say, we're just going to pull practice out of there? Who cares? We're just going to show up on Monday and just do whatever you want to do. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter if it works for anyone. Doesn't matter how it comes up. Does that seem like you're going to be in an environment for success to be able to get things done? No. Well, let's decide to just throw leadership to the wind. Nobody's going to provide any needs or support, guide, give tools, share codes, anything. You're just going to show up. Everybody's going to be walking around like bumper cars in the space when they show up on Monday. Right? So understanding that these things are all connected: culture, practice, and leadership as the anchors of equity work. You cannot do one and go, I'm equitable today. They all connect. Okay? So it's clear that you need to understand how these three pieces of the anchors work. So as you get the understanding of that foundational piece of culture, practice, and leadership, it's important that we jump into the four characteristics. Yes?
Excuse me. Okay, Tiffany, I have a burning question.
Okay. Is it burning like right this minute? Okay. If we could just pause 1 second. Write it down for me, okay? Thank you. So when we think about this culture, practice, and leadership, we've got to have these four pieces of rigor, relevancy, relationships, and expectations. So on the back of your paper, again, flip it over. You've kind of skimmed through it, your blue paper, green paper. In the middle-ish part of your section, you see relevancy, you see expectations, you see rigor, and you see relationships. So we look at this, and it's broken down about what students do, and teachers, and administrators. But let's start with the expectations. So in a school system, what we say is that administrators should have the highest expectation for what students are individually capable of achieving. So as a staff member, I should have the highest expectation for what you are individually capable of achieving. So when you come into a space, how do you think it feels if your boss automatically has assumptions about what kind of employee you're going to be? What if they've had a conversation with someone else from a previous department or a school? What if they've read a file and they come in with, I know you were hired to do this, but I'm just going to let you do this for now. So they come in with low expectations of what your skill, will, and ability are. So if you feel that as an employee, and we're doing that to our kids and our families, how do we expect to have successful relationships and outcomes? So when you look at expectations, it's saying maintain a culture of high expectations for what you're individually capable of achieving. Look at that individual. The other part is this rigor, right? And so we go, oh, rigor is just about classrooms and buildings. But this high caliber skills and learning take place because of what students are required to obtain academic success. So when you get hired, one of the other things I talk to my staff about as we move on is a year from now, I need you to be better than what you were when I hired you. If you're in the same level of knowledge and experience, that's not solely your fault. The two of us are doing something wrong. I need you to grow. It is my job to help build your capacity. I need to provide you with tools and skills and resources necessary. I need to provide the rigor in your professional space for you to be successful. So we need to make sure that you are gaining knowledge. You're gaining skill. Who wants to be in the same piece of knowledge base that they were on day one? We have a responsibility. And, I don't know, we're an academic institution. So we should be providing these things. The other part is relevancy. Now, relevancy in a classroom is so easy, right? We can say curriculum, books and materials. We do equity walkthroughs. We're talking about in a school. A school says, yeah, we love diversity, and it's Black History Month. And I say, guess what? I'm Black 365 days of the year, so we can't end at the end of February. So if you're only including me in this month, you're not really making things relevant. Are we embedded in social studies and science and math? We can easily have that conversation about what the relevancy looks like in a classroom or a building. But what about in an office or a department? You know, sometimes we'll do walkthroughs and we'll see things at schools, and Jeff and I were at a school and we saw a beautiful wall of some pictures, and I was thinking to myself, I wonder if the secretary or administrative assistant or executive assistant actually knows who the people are on that wall, or was it an effort to say, we're going to diversify the wall space, right? So when we talk about relevancy in your job, what is it connecting you to your job? Why do you do the work you do? What's relevant to your knowledge? And so in these professional spaces, we have to make sure that the content, your job, your practice is relevant to your ability to learn. And it's important that we engage in this motivational practice, right? Because when you're getting up every day like, oh, got to get to this job. And you say, I'm functioning at the highest level that I can, but God, I hate being here. My boss is not helping me. I don't know what's going on. All of these things are not healthy practice, and they land in your practice. So we have to talk about how do we show up in the space. What is the space? Assess that culture. What are the pieces of connection that you have to do your job? In order to do all these things, you have this piece of relationship. Now, nothing says that when we leave here today, we're all going to be best friends. I don't need everybody finding me on Facebook. We don't need to do that, right? Okay. Laughter is good, people. It's early in the morning. But it doesn't mean that we all have to be best friends. But we have to know how you show up in a space. Relationship is key. So I'll use myself as an example, because I think that's like real things that need to happen. I'm not a hugger. So anybody in here know that about me? That I'm not a hugger? A couple people, right? But there's something about education that people like to hug all the time, right? The first thing they walk in like, hey, and I'm like, hey, good morning, right? I do this, right? And then when I say, you know, I'm not a hugger, and then they have this look of they're offended. They're so deeply offended That I didn't say I don't like you. I did not say that I don't want you around me. I said that I am not a hugger. So the relationship piece needs to be that you need to understand that I don't want you in my space. It has nothing to do with you. I just don't want you in my space. And I think you should respect that and honor that, but not take offense to that. So when we have these conversations, the relationship is not that I'm a mean person. It's not that I'm not warm and fuzzy, which sometimes I am and I'm not, but it's me. It's my space, right? So the people that know me now say, good morning, Tiffany, and I say, good morning. We have relationship, right? The people that don't have relationship are still coming for me, and I'm like, nope, don't do it, right? But we have relationship. I have some that it pains them. I can see it in their face and their core not to hug me. They're like, and I'm like, it's okay. Like, just breathe. I still like you, right? But we have relationship. And so in order for us to do all these things, have high expectations. Just because I'm not a hugger doesn't mean that I'm not friendly. So your expectations should not be lowered because your level of engagement with me. Know me and understand that's who I am. Relevancy is that we can do this work and we can operate in these spaces, but just know that you don't have to make a public announcement every time I'm in the room. Oh, here comes Tiffany. She's not a hugger, right? Because then that causes me to not have very much trust in you. Right? And none of that has anything to do with my skill, will, or ability in a space. That gets back to the culture of things and how we operate. I understand we're in a hugging culture. So I respectfully say things like, I'm not a hugger. And people are like, oh, you would think that I said, you know, I just broke 15 laws. They're just heartbroken. So these pieces of equity in lighthearted terms, we can talk about that. But it does get deep down to the work and the practice. And it's important that we understand how all those components connect. So just in education, it's important that you understand this framework because we talk about all students when they provide all students with the individual support they need to reach and exceed a common standard, but it's all people. All of our families, all of our coworkers. It's really easy for us to, and I jokingly said earlier about I'm colorblind on some of these papers, but I am not colorblind in any sense of the word of seeing people. So even when you have a homogeneous group of people that may physically represent a like-minded set, there's still diversity within that group. Diversity is no magic wand that just all of a sudden it is laid on to people of color and a bonus that we get. Everyone in this room is diverse. Diverse comes across race, ethnicity, gender, skill, will, ability, life experience, your cultural worldview. All of these things make for a diverse population. But we throw diversity out there like a blanket because we don't want to honestly say what we're talking about. So we want a diverse workforce. Do you want a racially diverse workforce? You want a gender diverse workforce? You want an age diverse workforce? You want a sexual orientation diverse workforce? What do you mean? And when you create that space, how are we really talking about all? How are we providing the individual needs? How are we allowing people to be who they are in that space? Because depending on who you are and when you show up, that doesn't shift your knowledge, will, skill, and ability. Because what I said earlier is at our core, we culturally have some knowledge, some value, some tradition, some belief, and many of us lay that on to somebody else. And we say, because you have not adhered to my core values, traditions, and beliefs, what you bring is not right. And then we start laying other things on like, you can't do this, or they don't have this, or they don't value this, or they don't understand this, and we don't stop to assess what that means. What am I actually saying? So how do we reach this goal of like educational equity in our education systems? We use that framework. And you can understand that framework is not just in a building. As a department, when you meet with your department, start talking about it. What's the culture of our department? What is the practice of our department? What are we talking about leaders in our department? Have the conversation. What's relevancy like? How are we providing the skills for everybody to be successful in this space? Are we just providing skills for the ones we like? The other ones will figure it out, those fish out of water, right? Who's getting pushed to the margins? Who is like holding on for dear life every day to survive in some of those spaces? And are we truly creating an equitable environment for everyone to work and be successful? And it's important to assess these things. What does it look like? What does it feel like? What does it sound like in those spaces? We have to be able to have those conversations. So yes, oftentimes we solely talk about a school and a building and our students and our families, but equity is about an entire system, the entire structure of how we do our work. Okay? So I'm going to answer your question really quick, and then we're going to, and I apologize for pointing at you, so I take that back. I'm going to answer your question really quick, and then we'll go from there.
So, could you please define culture for us?
Culture, the definition of culture? Well, culture includes race and ethnicity, but it's all of who you are. So what you have to understand is, and I say this, and you need to hear this, it is not a bonus that you get because you're a shade of brown. Everybody has a culture, right? So we tend to think because we get locked in these definitions around diversity that white people do not have a culture. Everybody who is breathing has a culture. The way you eat, the way you practice religion or not, the way you dress, where you shop, how you sit, the language you use, also your race and ethnicity and your cultural and ethnic values, all of these things, your socioeconomic status, your geographic location, all of the things that interact your way of being and breathing describe all of who you are as a cultural being. It's not something that people get because they're brown. Everybody in this room who is breathing and has a pulse has a culture, right? And then for many of us, we are bicultural, we are tricultural. That's where that conversation of intersectionality comes in, because you have a cultural place that you operate in 8 to 5. You have a cultural place that you operate in when you get out of there. You have a cultural place that you operate in on the weekends. You have a cultural place that you operate in when you're with your family. You have a cultural place about where you shop. All of these things. So when people say things like, we want to express the values of our cultural community, what they're really saying is, we want to express the values of our communities of color. Because culture is not limited to race and ethnicity. It is inclusive of, but everybody has a culture. But we have been so inundated in these works and words around race and ethnicity and the conversation of racism and discrimination and prejudice and culture and identity that no one has stopped to take the time to actually have the conversation about what is it that you're actually saying. What is it that you're looking for? Does that answer your question?
That helps.
Okay. So I want to make sure that we have some time. Some of the work that we've done has been some work around our schools. Am I on my right time, Tony?
If you have had half an hour.
Okay. So I want to make sure that we show the videos. I'm actually changing, Tony, I'm changing you up a little bit because I want to show videos and have discussion. Because I want to let you all see some of the things that we're doing in the schools. Some of you have seen it, but I want you to take some time to look at, we did 3 ed talks, and we asked some of our principals to talk about this work. What I want to tell you is that this work is not finished work. Those 4 agreements that Glenn Singleton did his work around, the 4 courageous conversations, one of the biggest pieces are expect and accept non-closure. And so as we do this work, we continue to remind people that just because you went to a class and a workshop, you have a degree, you've got the certification, you've been to one of our trainings, it is not finished. So if you are in that space of, I did that 20 years ago, I have that certificate, I actually have a master's in equity and diversity, and I'm good, that's a dangerous place to be. We run the department. I teach at the university. We're constantly reading and building and shifting. We do not believe that we are done. So I will often, almost always push back when someone says, I teach the course. I took the class. I have the certificate. I have the degree. That is not a confirmation of finish. That is a tool to continue in the ongoing process. Our principles are continuing in the ongoing process. Okay? So I'm going to show the videos, and then we're going to come back for some discussion.
here at Marvin Moss Elementary, where we are a school that is 43% white, 38% Hispanic, 3% African American, 6% multiracial, 7% Asian, and 1% American Indian. Our special programs consist of 37% free and reduced lunch, 21% students with IEPs, and 17% English language learners. Sharing my information with you allows me to speak my truth today, allowing me to see the process I went through that has positively affected Moss's culture. During my first 2 years, I heard many comments from staff such as, our school has changed, we don't have the same kids like we did when we opened, the parents don't support us, parents don't help their kids, and our scores have gone down since we had the apartment kids. Along with many of the comments, I didn't observe the high expectations for all of our students or the academic rigor throughout the instructional day or building relationships with all students. Instead, I saw low expectations for the students who were low according to data and a lack of relationships with students who needed them the most. I kept saying, if you teach them low, they're going to stay low. I wasn't well heard, and I was concerned I wasn't building an effective learning culture, that I knew I wasn't leading the staff through a vision that would positively affect our students. Our school culture didn't have the rigor, relevance, and relationships needed to move our students forward. We were stagnant, and I was guilty of not addressing the comments and practices which continued to add to our school culture. After assessing, I realized it was time to make a plan. I enrolled in the Equity 101 class taught by the Equity and Diversity Department, and it became very clear to me that it was time to take on the tough work, have the difficult conversations, and work with my team to develop cultural competency. The summer before my 3rd year, I scheduled a meeting with Tiffany to discuss how I could bring that Equity 101 work back to the staff and engage them in the work that was so desperately needed. We planned 9 sessions for our staff, and many of the comments at the beginning of the sessions revolved around, we don't need this, why are we doing this, and you're just giving us another thing. The body language of the participants made it obvious that the content was uncomfortable and not something well received. Looking at exit tickets from week to week showed me the staff were really not being reflective about their own practice or their beliefs. They were silent during discussion. People would not answer questions or share stories. But Tiffany, Siobhan, Tony, and Chelsea were positive and would often wait them out. And it would become uncomfortable, and oftentimes I would just speak to break the tension. I knew we were experiencing discomfort, but backing away was not an option. So about halfway through the 9 sessions, I felt I was starting to hear more people sharing their truths, and which encouraged others to begin to share as well. I believe the most powerful moments during our professional development were when we discussed, reflected, and shared the information around equity traps. Specifically, during one of our sessions, a teacher shared that after listening to all of the information, she realized that she didn't push the students with disabilities in her classroom. She just thought they can't do it. She reflected and shared that she's more aware that she does this, and now she has shifted her thinking and improved her practice with increasing rigor for her students, regardless if they have a disability. Another student teacher shared she realized she often viewed parents who didn't attend events or conferences as not really caring about their child's education. She has reframed her way of thinking about families and offers a variety of ways for parents to communicate and participate throughout the day by sending pictures of students at work. Another teacher approached me after our last session and said he felt badly because a student in his class was failing, not completing assignments or projects. He just assumed he didn't have the support at home, he didn't care, and the parents didn't care. So one day, following a session, he pulled him aside and talked with him. The student shared that it isn't that I don't care. My mom and dad both work nights, and when I get home, I have to cook, do homework with my brothers, and put them to bed. He had made assumptions about a student's life and the parents' participation. The information from our sessions allowed us to reflect on our practice, and all of these instances have begun to shape and impact our culture at Moss. The process is ongoing. We've continued our work by having a book club during one Wednesday a month. 3 teacher leaders are leading that book club to continue that work. The focus of the book is building relationships, holding high expectations, committing to equity, and accepting professional accountability for student learning. We have shifted our thinking from what the students need to do to learn to what instructional practices we need to do to engage students in learning. These practices, along with our focus on meaningful student engagement and student discussion and collaboration, have allowed relevant teaching practice to be more of the norm at Marvin Moss. In November, the Equity and Diversity Department are coming out to conduct our very first equity walkthrough, and I'm hoping we see improvements specifically in our classroom setting. We have taken steps within our building. For as long as staff members can remember, the PTO has had a scholarship for Reed seniors to apply. Any senior who attended Marvin Moss could participate. However, extra points were given if your parents were PTO members or if you were a Moss for all of your elementary years. During our professional development, we discussed how inequitable the scholarship was since it did not give all students an even playing field. Students should not be penalized for their parents not being members or for having to move schools. These are situations where students are not in control. Therefore, it was taken to the PTO and we made that change to the point system. The work is ongoing and it is never done and it is not easy, and challenging the status quo was a very heavy lift. There were times I was frustrated and very angry and cried, but in the end I can see the positive impact it has had on our school and climate and culture. We have a long way to go and I know that, but we will continue our work each day, and I feel that I have built my capacity to feel comfortable to address the equity traps. We are not culturally proficient. However, we are moving in a positive and constructive way from a culture of blindness towards a culture of competence.
Okay, so I want you to take a few minutes, jot down some keys, words, phrases that you heard connecting in that video around culture. So take a couple minutes, and if you're close to someone, share with your a shoulder partner or a role partner. What did you hear? What connections did you hear to the conversation around culture that Colby talked about at Marvin Moss? Note, share. Let's popcorn out some of the things that you all heard. Popcorn, not hot lava, popcorn. What did you hear? What were some connectors? So what were some things that maybe just hit home for you? Yes?
Cultural competence, I thought, was a great phrase that she used because it talks about all cultures, but rather the culture of the school, not necessarily the culture of where you came from. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, and what she actually was saying is that we're not culturally competent, like it's not done, too, right?
Yeah.
So it's not finished. We're not all there, and it's a mixture, right? A mixture. Thank you. Who else? Popcorn. There you go.
Penalize students when they are not in control.
Yes, right? And I heard you having some conversation that sometimes we do going back to that autopilot, right? Knowing that our intention is not to harm kids. No one woke up this morning. Anybody decided that they were going to go in education to harm as many kids as they could? Anybody? No? Okay, good. Just checking. All right. So none of us got up and decided to do that. But sometimes we become complacent. And sometimes we don't even stop to evaluate these things and decisions. And that was powerful even for me to hear that they're getting that message. That some things, students are not in control of some of these things. And we do penalize. Right? So that was powerful. So thank you. Someone else. 2 more. Yes.
Difficult conversations. Because this is my school. It's my school, and I love her and I'm her counselor. And it was hard to be in that
Yeah.
for those 8-9 sessions.
Yeah. Yeah, and I applaud the school. I applaud all of our schools that call us in to do this long work, because it's not easy and it is difficult. But there was not at any time did the leader in that building say, this is really hard, my staff is not feeling that, we're going to stop. Right? But then, as my team talked, when we went back, we were like, there's still work, but we feel the difference, right? We hear the different it took 9 months, right? It takes some time. But we as a team know the difference from when we walked in day 1 to when we walk in now. Still work to be done because it's never finished, but we feel the difference. We hear the different conversation. We see the intentionality of the looking at the culture. So thank you for that. One more, last one. One more connection. Yes?
Is your going to school only by invitation?
That is a wonderful question. So we are not a punitive department, but we often deal in punitive things. So my message is always about a principal needs to invite us. Because we are the equity and diversity department, if I show up with all 5 of my specialists and say, we're going to mandate you to commit your school to this time, that feels even worse than just being in the difficult conversation. However, because our focus is district-wide equity and diversity, they are giving the required opportunity to call us. Does that make sense? Right? So if you call us, we can provide a required opportunity to come into your school. How's that? Yes, the last one. That was the last one, but you get the last one. There you go.
And it's just a general question because it made me think. What do you say about the students when they're calling themselves out, or you just said that because I'm black, or you just said that because I'm Mexican, or you're saying that because you're a white girl? What does that say about, what do you think that says about the culture of the school that the kids are identifying themselves as a different color or a different race and making you want and trying to make sure that you're aware?
So, great question. Students identifying themselves does not define the culture of the school. That's about the student.
Okay.
So those are separate things, right?
Even if that's what they're playing with when you're calling them out on a discipline issue that has
So-
nothing to do with race or culture.
So we have to be very careful because what I heard you say is that's what they're playing with,
Okay.
right? So remember what I said is at the core of us, we hold some value, tradition, and belief, right? So where race and ethnicity may not be the prevalent place that you lead with, doesn't mean it's the prevalent place that somebody else is leading with. And you may represent something that has wounded them. You may not even be the wound. So when you say playing with, you have to be very, very careful with that because we don't honestly know unless we've unpacked that. Because we as a system, students or our families or staff will say, you did that because I'm black, right? Now, I can tell you what I experience as a black woman in this professional space. And I know in my core what I experience because I'm black. Right? Now, if I make that statement in certain spaces, people will say, you're saying that because. But then when I break it down with the knowledge, will, and skill ability that I have to help you understand what's happening in this cultural space, then it clicks. I am not defending nor am I denying what students are making statements about. But the question is, do we unpack the statement or do we move straight to the penalty? Right? Because a student will say something like, you're doing this because I'm black, or you're doing this because I'm Hispanic, you're doing this because I'm Latino, you're doing this because I'm El Salvadorian, because remember, we have a range of diversity within diversity. You're doing this because I'm Mexican, you're doing this because I'm Asian, which typically doesn't happen very often based on our data and our demographics. Let's have some honest conversations, right? So when we do that, we don't say to a student, why do you say that? What is it that has happened that makes you believe that? We never say that. I shouldn't say never, 99.9% of the time. We don't say, what has happened that makes you believe this is what's happening? We say, that's not what's happening, you're using the race card, and we go straight to. Because you know why? There's no relationship. Going back to this work of equity. Right? So I would just caution around playing with, because we don't know what students are coming to us with. We also know that when our students walk into our spaces, they're coming with their identity, the identity of their parents, or the elder that's raised them, or the foster home that they're in, or the community. They're coming to school with all of these multiple identities. And we have to be mindful that we as a system have a role in what's happening to our students and our families and our staff. So I hear that often, but the power in that is this conversation. So when we say that, like, what does that mean? Because when you make that statement, it means something. When the student made the statement, or the family, it meant something as well. So as I said earlier, we're not a punitive department, but we get a lot of complaints around discrimination and other things. And the conversation I have with the family is that conversation. What exactly happened? What was said? What happened in that room that made you? So then I go back to the principal and say, okay, when you talk to the family, well, they said, I said, but this is what happened. And oftentimes when I have that conversation, the principal says, wow, or the person that I didn't think about it like that. So sometimes there's resolution, sometimes there's not.
So are you saying to respond by what makes you safe? I mean, if it's
Yes.
as simple as put your phone away, you're not allowed to have your phone out in class.
Mm-hmm.
So with that, what makes you say that you feel I'm picking on you because of,
Yeah.
your background?
Yeah, and a student may say, 6 of the white kids in class had their phone out and you didn't say anything to them.
Yeah, you're exactly right.
Which confirms why they feel that way, right? So this is what I'm saying. It's uncomfortable. It is uncomfortable. That is the response that they say. And then you have to ask yourself, your job then is go, did I not tell the 6 white students to put their phone away? And why do I only see that student with their phone all the time? Right? That's this work, not that work. And that's a deeper piece of the work around equity and cultural competency, right? Thank you. Thank you for that. Okay? Go to our next video.
So equity is something that I've been working on at Mendive. I haven't engaged the equity department like Marvin Moss has in a direct way. I would say that I've engaged them more in a consultative basis to help me improve my skills and improve as I seek to lead Mendive towards greater equity. I think it's something we've got to work on. All of us have to work on. We need to improve. Our schools are not what they should be. Mendive is not what it needs to be when it comes to equity. For me, one of the very first things that we need to do as we try and lead our schools towards greater equity is understand who we are and where we come from. None of us see the world in a truly objective way. We all experience the world through the subjective lens of our lived experiences. So I would like to share with you a little bit of my experience as it relates to equity and diversity. So if you head out of Reno and head east on Highway 50, the loneliest highway in America, go about 8 hours down that highway and you'll come to my hometown, Delta, Utah. Delta is a small rural community in Utah. It's a very proud community. Delta High School, which is home of the mighty Delta Rabbits. Delta has changed a bit since I left, but growing up there, the vast majority of students at Delta High School were white. The vast majority of the students there were members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So I grew up around people who looked like me, talked like me, had shared beliefs, had a shared history and culture, had similar morals and expectations. I graduated from Delta High and started my college career at Brigham Young University. BYU is also a very homogeneous place. About 80% of the students at BYU are white. About 98% of the students at BYU are members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I left BYU after a year and I went to Brazil. I lived in Brazil for 2 years and did missionary work there. Brazil, different than rural Utah, different than BYU, is a very diverse place. I loved my time in Brazil and came to love the language, the people, the culture, the food, their rich history. After I finished 2 years there, I came back to BYU, where I finished my undergraduate degree. So I share a little bit about my history, not because I find it difficult or problematic in any way. I am very proud of where I come from. I'm proud of my family's history and heritage. I love BYU. My oldest daughter is a freshman there. As a matter of fact, on Tuesday night, I will be at the Lawler Event Center in the BYU section, cheering the Cougars against the Wolfpack. I share it because it's part of my history, it's part of who I am, and it's part of how I see the world and how I interact with other people. And when I graduated from BYU, my wife and I made a conscious decision to seek employment outside of Utah. And I took my first teaching job in Killeen, Texas, based on a phone interview. I had never been to the state of Texas when I accepted the job. Killeen is an army town next to Fort Hood Army Base. Fort Hood of some fame for some tragic events that have happened there over the years. As an army town, Fort Hood has people there from all over the country, really from all over the world. The schools that I worked at in Texas were roughly 30% Hispanic, 30% white, 30% black. Very different from the community, the school, the area that I grew up in. I remember very well my first day, my first year as a teacher, and it was a difficult time. I didn't relate very well to the students that I was teaching. I had a tough time understanding them. In some ways they had a tough time understanding me. In many ways, my experience as a first-year teacher in Central Texas was a more foreign experience than my 2 years were in Brazil. So I found some things that have helped me as I've tried to lead towards greater equity in the places that I have worked. The first thing is, as I've shared, to recognize who I am and what my background is and where I come from and how that influences the way I see the world. The second thing that I always try to do is to truly listen to people. Listen and try and understand their experiences and carefully observe similarities and differences that I have between people that I work with, people that I live with. And finally, the most important thing is to love everybody that I work with and everybody that I serve. Those things have led me to make the changes that I need to make to bring about greater equity. So some practical things that we've done at Mendive to move in that direction. Tried to, in that listening and observing, find opportunities that I can leverage for change. So one of those came up as I started at Mendive. We started some conversations about our algebra, the advanced math that we offer 8th graders, and we had a very selective criteria for allowing students to be in algebra. Only the very top students were allowed to take algebra. I had questions from some parents, some students, some of the staff saying that doesn't seem to really fit with our focus on the growth mindset and supporting students who are taking risks and challenging themselves. We had a lot of conversations because we didn't want to do anything that would be harmful for students. We wanted to give students an opportunity. We greatly expanded who we let take algebra, and we then looked at the results. We pulled in the data from these students. We found that students who we previously had excluded from taking algebra because they didn't score high enough on the MAP test, in fact, did very well in our algebra classes based upon their grades, their EOC scores, the district common assessments. So by having a conversation, making some changes, and then evaluating those changes using the data, now my staff has a deeply ingrained belief that many more students than they previously thought possible could be successful in an advanced math class. Another opportunity we had for change was around our 8th grade graduation or awards night that we have. So we have 4 8th grade teams at Mendive. 3 of them are regular teams, and 1 of them is the GT Magnet team. Where we used to do things is we'd have 2 teams a night come. That's how many we could fit in our gym. And we would call up students one at a time and recognize them for their awards. So you guys have seen that. It goes something like this. You call up Sally Smith, and you say, Sally Smith, excellence in math, excellence in science, excellence in social studies, History Day Award winner, math counts winner, excellent citizenship, perfect attendance. If you're Bill Smith, good at art. Right? So the only thing worse at our school than following Sally Smith was if you were the team that happened to be paired with the GT team for that night, because the GT team had about 80 Sally Smiths. So we had some questions from our staff and from our parents and community saying, it's not really very fun to go and attend those nights. So we listened and we made some changes. We still recognize individual students, but we do it in a way that doesn't make other students feel inferior. We still invite and do this on a team basis, but we don't have 2 teams there tonight. We do 1 team at a time, so nobody has to be paired with another team that's really not set up as an equal team. So these are some opportunities that we had based on conversations with our staff that easily could have been ignored when these questions or comments came up. But by taking advantage of them and leveraging them, we have made some small changes at Mendive. We're not to where we need to be, but I believe that these changes are incremental and have a positive cumulative effect. What we're working towards at this time is Mendive is, as Colby shared with Moss, demographics are changing. Mendive opened in 1995, and the community is very different than it was. We are being rezoned this next year, and will continue to change. We're very focused on making sure that Mendive, even though the community around it changes, continues to be a great and proud school, and that we achieve spectacular results no matter what changes around us. So my hope, my belief is that as we recognize who we are and we honor our own past, our own heritage, our own culture, and recognize how it shapes the way we see others, as we truly listen and carefully observe others, and we love those that we serve, that will help us to develop the skills that we need and the courage that we need to take advantage of those opportunities and leverage them for change and move our schools towards being more equitable places. Thank you.
Okay, so principal at Mendive, Brandon Bringhurst, talked about leadership. So we're going to do the same thing we did with culture, take a few minutes, What connections do you see to the conversation we had about leadership? What hits out for you? Take a couple of notes, and then turn to a shoulder role partner and share with your partner. Oh, look at that. I didn't even have to count you all down. So let's take some popcorn approach again. A couple of things that stood out to you, connected. What did you hear just around this leadership piece, around equity? Growth mindset. What else did you hear? Yes?
They seem to be more acceptable to change.
Acceptable to change. What else? Say it again. Evolving with your student body. Yes. And so one of the things I will tell you, the difference with Moss and the MnDive, so we were in Moss for 10 months. Most of my work with MnDive is with the principal. So we've literally sat down and he's like, Tiffany, can we look at the data? Can we look at this? Can we look at that? And as this leader, one of the other powerful pieces that he is saying is recognizing, as I said, who you are when you show up in this space. We are not by any means saying erase who you are. And he's saying, like, this is who I am. This is how I was raised and believed. But I know that. And I know what that looks like. So as that leader, right, what are you doing? Talking to your team. And if you all are aware of what's getting ready to happen with our new schools and some of the new zoning, some of the zoning that happens in communities creates segregation unintentionally for communities. So MnDive is going to be a very interesting thing that's happening. All of the gifted and talented program is going to leave the school. The demographics are going to shift at the school. So that means, what is the culture of that school? What is the climate? What are they talking about? What is the leader in that building talking about? How we show up in this space. So when we talk about equity, there's going to be some interesting things happening with zoning of communities. So we need to have honest conversations about what is the culture? Who's the leader in that building? What is the practice? What do we believe about kids? Right? Okay, so we'll go to our last video.
Morning. I have not been to Brazil like Brandon, but I am from Texas. I grew up in El Paso, Texas, so I remember meeting some people from Killeen, Texas. So that's one thing in common with Brandon. But good morning. I am here to share with you the work that we are doing with the equity framework as we at Hub High School focus on equity and how to enhance our practice. So this year we have a year-long training where the equity team, Tiffany and her team, are coming in twice a month to do the difficult work of focusing on cultural competency. They come in twice a month. On a Tuesday, we have PLC preps for all of our teachers. So they have PLC every day. So they come in and do a small group session, and they come back on Wednesday to do a whole staff session during the early hour. So I just want to share that it's very true what the equity team always says, that these are difficult conversations. There's a lot of challenges when you bring up cultural competency. So as we focus on equitable practices through cultural competency, those are the conversations that we are having every day as we move on. The teachers have gone through different stages. Some teachers have been defensive. Some teachers have cried. Other teachers are feeling blamed. They have come up and said that, that we're pointing fingers at them. But this is not about us individually. This is about the work that we're doing in the classroom. So there's a lot of teachers on the other side of the spectrum as well who have come up and said, you know what, this is giving me the opportunity to self-reflect. They're engaging now in conversations. We're identifying implicit biases that we all know we have, but haven't had the opportunity to identify them. So we have the teachers going through the different stages from not accepting to self-reflecting to growth, which is our goal. So our goal is to ensure that this impacts what we do in the classroom, as a school, and the practices that we move on to support our students, both as teachers and administrators. So in order to develop the practice of the teachers, we don't want this to be, like it said before, just a checkbox. Okay, we're done one time or twice a month, equity and diversity comes in and we no longer speak of it. So we're really trying to incorporate it throughout the year. So every professional learning opportunity that we have, we focus on cultural competency and equity as well. So some examples to that as we go through professional learning year-long is what can we do with this work and what we are learning and what we're talking about as we plan for lessons, as we plan for our classroom management, as we look at the school-wide practices that we have in place. Are they equitable? Are they door closers or door openers? So we did have a professional learning aside from the equity and diversity that focused on the door openers and door closers, and we discussed as a staff what practices do we have in place that are providing opportunities, and what practices do we have that are door closers, and what can we do about that? Another example is we had an early out Wednesday where we did a cross-curricular training so that teachers from the different departments could talk about specific students and why some students being successful in English but possibly not in elective or in math. And we brought in the cultural competency as well. Is it a door closer or a door opener that we have in the classroom or as a school that is creating these challenges for some students? We also, through every professional learning that we do have, because we have the PLC prep, at least 4 professional learning during PLC prep and 1 school-wide every month. So we are always reminding our staff that the work that we're doing and these conversations that we're having is not just so that we can move on, but what can we do individually? What can I do as a principal? What can you as a teacher or classified do to make a difference and to identify inequitable practices taking place? So as we have moved on, in the beginning when we saw the exit tickets, like it was talked about before, you almost feel like there's not going to be any growth, and you're afraid. It is scary. But the conversations now are taking place. So we're hearing more and more about implicit biases, about door closers. I'll give you some examples. We were at the department lead meeting and one of the teachers mentioned, some of us believe that the tardy lockout policy is a door closer. It's providing a barrier and it's something that we need to discuss. So they're starting to use the words. We had another teacher who at the very beginning in one of the sessions with the equity and diversity team, she was very defensive, but she came into my office now, had a one-on-one conversation, and really appreciated this effort because now she's self-reflecting, and she said, now I know that I need to pause before I speak, and I need to be conscious of what I'm saying or what I'm doing that is creating a door closer. We have a teacher who went back into her classroom and had the students identify door closers in her classroom and as a school. We posted it up in a poster board laminated. We used that for another professional learning that we did on grade distribution and data analysis. And we have the teachers review what the students were saying. And so identify some of these barriers that are probably practices that we have in place that we don't realize, and that's why it's impacting the data. So these are great conversations. Just yesterday I did a walkthrough and I emailed the teacher a self-reflection question. He emailed back and he actually said, that's a great question, and I thought of another question. How can I make the story that we're reading more culturally relevant to my students? So the conversations, the words are taking place. Moving forward, that is our goal, to continue this practice even though it's difficult, and continue to have these conversations, identify implicit biases and equitable practices. What can we do in the classroom as school-wide to ensure the success of all students? Thank you.
So as the principal at HUG mentioned, we're there for an entire year. We're there once a month. My team is there from 7:45 in the morning until 2:30ish, 7 sessions back to back with their leadership team. And then on that Wednesday, we have the whole group as a school. And just looking at the practices and the conversations that they're having and the work, it's ongoing. It is a tough process, but the practice is important. As you heard, reevaluating that, We are a capacity building department. Our work is around whether you take our 16 hours of professional learning, whether we're in your school providing professional learning, whether we're doing department or school-wide professional learning. That is our goal, and the practice is key. You can see that the conversation is landing in the practice, and it's ongoing. So I want to give you all maybe just a couple of minutes to do the same thing with practice. What did you hear Christina at Hug say that they're doing to connect to the practice? So take a minute or two, jot some things down, share with the shoulder partner, and then we'll come back whole group. So what was some of the connections that you saw around practice? What did you hear Christina from Hug sharing about practice? Yes?
They went to their students and asked their students what they thought.
Student voice, right? The conversation around opening doors and closing doors, one of the other pieces of work we're doing is I'm coaching area superintendents through the book Opening Doors to coach their principals through. And one of those activities is really what are the door openers and door closers that are happening in schools and buildings. But you can also have that conversation in your department. What are the door openers and door closers? And so they went to their students and said, what are the door closers you're experiencing right now? And that student voice informs that practice. That is very, very powerful for students. So thank you. What else did you hear about that, about practice from Christina? Yes.
I like the piece where they were, the staff was having conversations about changing practice, as well as staff to principal having conversations. I remember when I first started teaching, I had a difficult time knowing how to meet the needs of certain groups of students or even individual students. I did not have the skills and tools early on that I needed. And it took me years to develop those tools and skills and strategies to meet the needs of individual students. But if I had had or taken the opportunity to talk with other staff members or with my supervisor, that might have expedited the process of coming up with those practices that I needed to meet the needs of those students.
Yeah. And so that practice is key. The one thing I hope that you all heard through all three messages is that it's ongoing work. I hope that you all did not watch that video and go, oh, they got it, they finished. This work is continuous. Understanding this work of equity is ongoing and continuous work. And it takes different layers and approaches, various tools and resources, an array of balance around professional learning, to be able to grow in your capacity. And it doesn't just stay in the classroom, it doesn't just end in a building, it happens across a department. So one of the things I want to share with you, these are two of the books that we reference, Curtis Linton's Equity 101 book, The Equity Framework, and his other book, Culture. The Equity 101 book is the book that we built the 16 hours of professional learning that we have. So Equity 101 is in my PGS. Some of you are in there. Some of you have already taken it. And you can take that course through my PGS, and we facilitate that work. Both of those books give you opportunity for reflection. All of the tools and resources that we use give you all pieces of reflection. There is not one opportunity that you have a connection with the work of the Equity and Diversity Department that we do not put you in a space of reflection. We have to individually understand who we are in this space to be able to do this work. So when we understand equity at its core, it is not just about what are we doing for people out there. It is who are we and how do we do things with, not to and for, but in partnership, connection, and collaboration with. So equity is our goal and our hope for all of our students, our families, and our staff. And I hope that today was a powerful session for you. We have like 2 minutes if you have questions. I'm going to save Fred for a minute because you may have other questions around equity. We just talked about it. If you have questions, please contact me. I'm not going to be here for the rest of the day. I mentor a wonderful group of young women, professional women in the community, and have a brunch. So it's at 10:30, and I made this commitment a month ago, but I believe in mentoring, and so that's a whole other side conversation. Sorry about that. But I just want to let you know if you have a bunch of questions for Fred and they pertain to me, feel free. I'm T. Young at Washoe Schools. Jeff is going to be here throughout the day. If Jeff can or cannot answer let me know. But I definitely appreciate you all engaging with me and being in this space and this time, and I hope the rest of your day is awesome.
And Jeff, would you raise your hand back there in the back? Thank you, Tiffany. Jeff, would you raise your hand and stand up? That's Jeff back there, and he also is in the Department of Equity and Diversity.
And he'll be doing a session today. So you have like 2 minutes for any burning questions. Otherwise, you can call me or email me. Yes, or come to my office.
When we're talking about different cultures and everything, a couple of us in our group are in special needs.
Okay.
Is that being involved and investigated to appropriate for them, where they're being pushed in and not being a part of?
Yeah, and our special education department is the culture. Our special education community is bicultural, tricultural. We also have silo thinking when we talk about special education, because we limit it to just physical disabilities, but we don't have conversation about the disproportionate identification around, so yes, we're having many of those conversations about where placement is, simple pieces of internal structure of segregation and isolation, of push in and pull out. So yes, we are having, but remember, this work takes a long time. But we are having those conversations, so thank you. Yes?
I would like to hear how all the work and time you're spending at HUG is working, or what are the benefits you're seeing?
One thing we don't give enough credit to is the benefit of the conversation, right? The work of equity and diversity and cultural competence is really tough to measure sometimes, and people don't realize that when a school gets to a place where they're having the uncomfortable conversation, that's growth, right? And that's where I can say is that HUG is doing some things in their classroom, but we're also seeing where people just absolutely would not say anything or completely push back, to now they're like, okay, well, what does that mean? Well, what is that? So I will say that what's happening at HUG now is some conversation that is uncomfortable, but good conversation. Good conversation, yes. One more question, because I want to be respectful of time. And then you can catch me in the 5-minute break that you have. No? Thank you all very much. Have a wonderful day.